Fundraiser? All right. Well, that was really fun. Thank you for your support. We had a fundraiser so that we can keep this day's event free for the entire public. So thank you for being there, and now the killer will speak.
Oh, yes, I got out on bail just for this event. I have apparently a good lawyer, so that's why I'm here today. So welcome, this is so exciting this year. I just wanted to share a little bit about some other things that are happening in the community. This year we have a lot of involvement around the town as well. So we have 5 restaurants that are participating with special menus for LitFest. Vino e Vivo has the Edgar Allan Poe boy on the menu. Ambrose across the street has the official cocktail of the LitFest, the Lord of the Mai Tais. And Cornicello has Dante's Divine Comedy in 3 acts on the menu tonight. Also participating is Otis and the Thirsty Moose, and they're giving 15% off for people that come in and say they've been to the LitFest. So go support them. It's awesome, and all the food is amazing, and it's just such a great community, so we really wanted to extend it into the night with something fun. And with no further ado here, because I know you're here to hear the actual authors who are behind this curtain, I'm going to bring out our keynote speakers. We have Brendan DuBois, woohoo, who is our local Steph Kuiper-Schmidt and J.D. Barker. And Steph Schmidt, who is on our LitFest board, and we're like the 3 amigos here, Steph and Renee and I. We've been, I think, seeing each other quite a bit the last few months. Steph is going to moderate and introduce these gentlemen. Oh, and it would probably be good if they had a microphone. Hold on. Oh, I don't know.
Just take
Here, I'm just going to carry the whole thing to you, Steph.
Okay. I think there were supposed to be one for each of us. Do you want to see if there's 2 more down there? Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone.
Technical difficulties. Hold on.
Thank you. Be on here. You want to? All right. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Steph Schmidt. I'm the manager at Water Street Bookstore, right across the street. I'm on the Exeter LitFest board. We're so delighted to have you all joining us today. We're also delighted to have our 2 authors here with us, Brendan DuBois and J.D. Barker. Both Brendan and J.D. have collaborated with the best-selling author James Patterson on several novels each, so we're going to chat a bit about their experience and as well as their experiences writing their own novels. Brendan DuBois is the New York Times bestselling author of 24 novels, including The First Lady, The Cornwalls Vanish, and The Summer House, which were co-authored with James Patterson, and more than 180 short stories. His full-length books include the 11 novels and the Lewis Cole series, as well as the It's exciting.
Cool.
J.D. Barker is an international best-selling author whose work has been broadly described as suspense thrillers, often incorporating elements of horror, crime, mystery, science fiction, and supernatural. He co-authored The Coast to Coast Murders and The Noise, as well as the forthcoming Death of the Black Widow, which comes out next week. Is that right?
Oh,
yeah.
well done.
All those are all with James Patterson. His novels have been translated into 24 languages and optioned for film and TV. And as a quick introduction to James Patterson, who's not here, but in spirit, he's written hundreds of books in nearly every genre and has sold 400 million plus copies. He's also a very generous philanthropist. Indie booksellers will just smile when you say his name because he's a real sweetheart. He does this nice bookseller bonus program every December where bookstores nominate their booksellers and say why they're great, and then he just sends them a check for $500. It's like super sweet. So nice guy that you guys are working with. We approve. So why don't we start by each of you telling us about how you got into writing and publishing, your sort of origin stories. And I don't know who wants to start.
You go first.
All right, so I'm a little rusty at this. I've been locked in my house with COVID for the last 2 years and basically doing these things by Zoom. So, hello, people. Not used to it. So I actually started in publishing years back. I was in Fort Lauderdale in college. I worked for RCA Records through BMG. I was basically a glorified babysitter. So when they had a recording artist that came into town, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to the radio station, get them to their concert, get them to their hotel, hopefully get them back on an airplane. I quickly realized that I had people like Madonna, and this is going to date me, New Kids on the Block, Tiffany, Debbie Gibson. These guys were in my car, and I had student loans I needed to pay. So I started to interview them. Started to sell those to Teen Beat, Teen People, those types of magazines. And when you work in that world, in newspapers and magazines, you quickly realize everybody's got a novel in a desk drawer somewhere that they started and haven't finished. It's this big. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's almost done, but they need somebody to help it with. So I started working on those and basically created a career as what's called a book doctor and a ghostwriter, helping other people get published. I ended up doing that for 23 years, had 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list, all with other people's names on the cover. That gets old after a while. So I struck out on my own and I got really lucky. I'm going to cut this short, but my first book was called Forsaken. Stephen King helped me out with that one a little bit. Second one was called The Fourth Monkey. That one really created or started my career, and then Jim called me and kind of went from there.
Madonna, very cool. Mine's not nearly as exciting or interesting. I just grew up in the Seacoast, had a career in journalism and as a tech writer. Started selling short fiction back in the 80s. My first novel, book 1 of the Lewis Cole series, came out in 1994. And I was what they'd happily call a mid-list author, some good years, some not so good years. And then about 5 years ago, a friend of mine in publishing called me up and said, James Patterson is starting something called Book Shots, which are going to be novellas of about 40,000 words, not a single word more. And I suggested that he contact you. And Jim's business partner called me up and said, Jim's read some of your short fiction. He's interested. Please audition. So I auditioned by sending him one of my short stories. He liked it, and then off we went. And we did 3 book shots. And at the time, I was working with an editor at Little Brown, and I worked with her, and she worked with Jim. And Jim talked to her, and she talked to me. So like Jim was on Olympus, she was midway down in the mansion, and I was toiling in the vineyards. And then one day she called me up and said, Jim wants to talk to you. And my first instinct was, what's wrong? And she said, nothing, Jim just wants to talk to you. So yeah, it's kind of freaky to see caller ID say James Patterson on it. And he called me up and said he enjoyed my short novels, the book shots, and I had done an outline for a 4th one about a missing first lady called, strangely enough, The First Lady. And he said, I really liked the outline you did here. Would you be interested in doing a full-length novel with me? And he said, well, I'll give you a week or 2 to think about it. And I said, no, I'm good. Let's do a full-length novel. So we've done 3 together, and the 4th one is coming out this September called Blowback. And I'm about 3/4 of the way done with the new one, and I'm pretty sure JD will agree with me. This has been one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life, working with James Patterson.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's almost like, first of all, the 2 of us have signed NDAs that are about this thick. So when we saw the title for this presentation, I'm not quite sure what all we can talk about. But if you're an author and you've taken Jim's masterclass online, which is available, it's like $99, and he basically walks you through his writing process. It's basically exactly the same as that, except in our world, he actually calls you and tells you everything you did wrong.
Yes.
So that's probably the only caveat.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to step on you, Steph, but the favorite phrase he works for me when something's not right is he just lets out this big sigh. I'm just not buying it. I'm just not buying it. Does he say that to you?
I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a script in front of him and he uses the same lines on each of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he tells you at least 3 times, I think it can be better, I think it can be better, because the ending is never right.
Yeah.
I've noticed that. I'm 4 books in with him, and I've noticed he always pushes back at least 3 times on every ending.
Yeah.
And I hang up the phone, I kick and scream for a little bit, and then I realize he's right.
He's right. He's always right.
Yeah, he's always been right, so you just do it.
Just do it.
Did you guys read, were you fans of his before you started working with him? Did you read some of his books to kind of get a feel for what it was supposed to look like, or did you just kind of do your own thing?
no such thing as doing your own thing.
I'm weird when it comes to this entire world. I've got a form of autism called Asperger's, and one of the things that it allows me to do is mimic other people's voices. So when I was working as a ghostwriter, I could read other people's material and I could basically start creating it. To put that in perspective, I wrote a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family using Bram's original notes, and I personally can't tell which parts he wrote versus what I wrote.
That's cool.
And it was mainly because I read Dracula, I listened to the audiobook on a constant repeat, but got that cadence in my head. I had read Jim before. I read primarily the Alex Cross books and a couple of his co-authors' books, not quite as many as I probably should have. I do now just to try and keep the cadence a little similar to his own. But he found me after reading, I sent him Fourth Monkey, my first thriller, hoping to get a blurb, one of those little sentences on the back of the book. And then he actually called and reached out to me and we started talking about possibly collaborating. But we kind of ran into a brick wall because Jim is famous for using outlines and I'm basically known for not. I'm what they call a pantser. I come up with an idea for the book, come up with my characters, and just sort of let the story tell itself. So with that first book, we kind of walked away from a lunch that we had thinking we weren't going to be able to work with each other, and he came back and said, you know what, let's go ahead and try it. So the Coast to Coast Murders was actually the first book Patterson wrote without an outline, basically pantsed every chapter. When we did The Noise, the second novel, he said, okay, let's try it my way, and he sent me an outline, and we did that, and again, he was right. It was way easier. So.
Yeah, that was something I had to get adjusted to. Was usually my outlines. I'm sort of a pantser, but my outlines would run 3 to 5 pages. Just a basic idea of where the book went. But Jim asked, really detailed outlines, and so they'd run anywhere from 50 to 60 pages of how the book would turn out. And I loathe writing outlines, but it's right. Because when you're stuck somewhere, you go back to the outline and say, oh, so that's what's supposed to happen next. So I learned about writing outlines, but still for my own stuff, more of a pantser than an outliner.
How many writers are actually here in the room? Okay, so we've got a few of you. So basically what I've figured out, I've got a podcast called Writers Inc. where I talk about a lot of this stuff, but I've kind of stumbled into my magic formula, which is a very light outline. I know my beginning, my middle, and an end, and a couple of things that take place in the middle. The outline really helps you because, if you're pantsing a novel completely, you get, let's say, 2/3 of the way in, and you might get this, really cool idea that works perfectly, but that means you have to go back and you have to change the first 2/3 of the book to incorporate that. And if you're doing an outline, you basically get that same idea while you have an outline, so you're only changing 20 or 30 pages of an outline. It's much faster. You can incorporate an entire storyline in 5-10 minutes and be done with it. So when you actually write the book, you hit the ground running. So it's definitely more efficient.
Are you both working on your own separate novels at the same time, or do you just sort of focus on your Patterson novels? And how do those two things look different in terms of the writing process?
You sound like my agent. So I've gotten myself into trouble. So I'm a New York Times bestseller on my own. So I've got a lot of people that are, I've got books that are due. But Jim keeps calling, and we keep coming up with these ideas. So I've been bouncing back and forth, one for myself, one for him, one for me, and that's kind of worked. But the pressure is starting to really turn on my own novels. I've got TV shows and movies in development and things like that are really taking off. So at some point soon, I think I'm going to have to make a decision. But I love working with the guy, and I'm learning so much. It's really hard to walk away from that.
Yeah, I tend to work on Jim stuff. Jim, we call him Jim. In the morning, in the afternoon, I work on my own short fiction, just because I love the form of the short fiction, and I also work on a novel of my own. At the moment, I have 2 novels that my agent's trying to place, so far unsuccessfully, but I'm still working on my own stuff, just because as much as I love working with Jim, and I love working with Jim, and I'll work with him as long as he wants to keep working with me, there's just something about having your own stuff to play with. It's your own playground. You can have your own characters. You can have your own things. You can have long chapters. So, do I spy Suzanne Eden in the back row? No? I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, what do you each have planned? I guess you sort of talked about this a bit, but are you going to keep working with Patterson sort of as long as he keeps calling, or do you think it's kind of this time in your writing career and you're going to do something different?
I honestly enjoy it. I'll keep doing it as long as he wants to do it, and try to figure out how to get 26 hours out of the day to keep making it happen. But I'm learning so much. I mean, I'm on the board for International Thriller Writers, so I know pretty much everybody in that crowd. None of them have James Patterson on the other end of a phone call telling you how to write a book, and the guy's pretty good at it. I've gotten to know Dean Koontz really well, Stephen King, Dan Brown, who lives down the street, some of these other guys. I'm constantly harping them, asking them for advice. How do you do this? How do you do that? I read a book by Dale Carnegie years ago that said no matter what career you basically want to chase, find somebody who's at the top of that career and emulate whatever it is they did. So I tend to hound these guys to the point of wait for restraining orders to show up. But it's working. They've helped steer my career. Jim has really he's been a huge influence on me, and so have these other guys. And that's the reason I think I'm selling books on my own. It's all part of a formula that seems to be working out. So I don't want to mess with it.
Yeah, if it's working, don't mess with it. That's my motto too. So yeah, I'll work with Jim as long as he wants to keep working with me. And again, as JD says, he's always right. My first book with him, The First Lady, when I sent him the first pages, that's one trade secret. He doesn't want the full book when you're done. He likes to be intensely collaborative. So you're sending in pages come back. There's a lot of back and forth. So I sent him the first chapters of The First Lady. He called me up and he said, well, I like the writing, but the first 3 chapters, you can condense that into 1. Okay, Jim. And I hung up the phone. I was really bummed. And then I reread the first 3 chapters, and you know what? He was right. You strip this, strip that, condense it, make it happen, make it work. One thing I learned from him is that his writing style, which I've learned, is you've got to pretend the reader is in a movie theater, and reading your book is like watching the movie unspool, and you keep their attention at all moments and all times, Sometimes he teases me. He says, yeah, Brendan, cut out all that literary jumbo mumbo. Just stop trying to impress us. Get to the point. So.
I had that same conversation with him yesterday. He's like, that sentence is just a little too flowery. It's not for one of my books. Don't do it again. Yeah. He let me leave it, but.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is a story I've got to tell. Are there people here who would be he used a particularly common swear word that begins with F. So anyway, the book that's coming out this fall, Blowback, there was a scene towards the end when things are sort of resolved and the male and female characters who are separated by continents in time meet up together. And I tried my hand at writing a little romantic scene where they finally meet up. And that was a mistake, because Jim called me up, and we go chapter by chapter. And then we get to the chapter where I wrote the romantic scene, and he said, what the bleep do you think we are, Lifetime? Get rid of it. And he was right, I got rid of it.
Yeah, I think if anything, I mean, if you know anything about Jim, I mean, he came from marketing. He wrote the Toys R Us theme song of all things, years back. But like, he hasn't lost that. I think that's what actually drives him. I always get the feeling that every decision he makes is driven by how am I going to be able to sell this? How can I come up with something unique? And the conversations that we have, a lot of it are related to that. Like, he knows that this book is it could be a movie, could be a TV show, could be this, could be that. If you think about his latest project with Dolly Parton, like if somebody told me that a year ago, Dolly Parton and James Patterson are going to write a book together, I would have shaken my head. Like, why would that? But the fact that it's so weird and so odd is why it's working so well, and so many people are talking about it, and the reason that book is #1 on the list. I'm sure he thought of that straight off the bat, before they actually started the book. He's always going there, which again I find fantastic, because he's approaching this from a very different angle. Most of the writers that I know, most writers in general are extremely, introverted. We lock ourselves in a room and literally just make stuff up that we don't tell anybody about for a year, but he's kind of the opposite of that, and I find that very refreshing.
Yeah, he's often told me he's more of an ideas guy than a writer, and he says he has more ideas than he knows to do with, and then he'll do out of the pot, working with Dolly Parton. Who would have ever thought about that? But it's a tremendous success, and now Reese Witherspoon is going to be producing a movie about it. So there you go.
That's great. it sounds like he is maybe not a taskmaster, but he keeps you on a schedule. Is that help? Is that something you're going to use going forward with your other writing? Is it help to be to have those frequent calls where he's checking in on you, or does that feel like a lot of pressure?
Well, there's always pressure in that your goal in life is make Jim happy. When Jim's happy, the universe is happy. And so you work very hard to make Jim happy. And, but you send out the words, and he's very, when I first started working with him, I was just stunned because I'd worked with editors where you'd send copy in and you wouldn't hear back for a month or two. And when he called back in 2 days, I was just stunned. Sometimes he even calls back in 1 day, which just floors me. And again, it's always a learning experience, but you wait, does he say, yeah, these words are good, I don't like this one, fix this, have you thought about this? Or, nah, I'm not buying it. That's his, I'm not buying it. And that's when you're in trouble. But he's always gracious. And a lot of times we talk about other things, even though he must have a schedule as long as my arm, because he's making phone calls to other people. And he has an assistant named Mary Jordan, whom we've never talked to, but she's like the power behind the throne. And if you make Mary happy, everybody's happy, because I don't say she controls her life, but she schedules her life. And that's one thing. Jim doesn't use email. Mary sends us emails. Jim says this, or Jim says that, or, am I right?
I actually sent her a coffee mug for Christmas a couple years back that says, "I am Jim Patterson's email." So yeah, you're right.
Oh, how cool is that?
In my work, I've been doing this for a very long time. So when I worked as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, the entire process was very collaborative. So most authors come up solely on their own. They're writing by themselves, and they send it off to an agent, that kind of thing. I've always had multiple cooks in the kitchen, so I'm kind of used to that. In a lot of ways, always taking the place of my wife, which is kind of silly, because when I write a book on my own, my wife is the first person to read it. So she basically gets it. She tells me everything that's wrong and gives it back. So in this world, he's the person who does that. But I also use I've got 6 different beta readers that go through all of my stuff, and these are people that are extremely nitpicky, will find absolutely everything wrong with the book and get it back to me. And I do that on purpose, because it's a lot easier to fix things with 6 people than it is with 60,000 people after that book comes out. If I get one thing wrong, I wrote one time that a 38 had a safety.
Oh my God.
It doesn't. That got published. I got like 1,000 emails from people with an aha moment because they caught me. So you've got to fix those things ahead of time.
And Glocks don't have safeties.
Glocks don't have safeties, yeah,
and you can't use a silencer in a revolver. So
no, that stuff gets drilled into your head.
And never ever kill a cat.
No, and you really shouldn't kill a dog either. You can kill kids, but you can't kill a dog. Maybe a parrot, they'd probably be okay with that, but
definitely no cats.
Yeah, no
cats were harmed in the writing of this novel. Yeah.
One of the other things that I do, a lot of people, they don't realize just how many people are actually involved in a novel, but my beta readers, I have them highlight any places in the book where they find themselves skimming, because I want to know where I'm losing their attention. When they put the book down, to go and make dinner or pick up their kids from school, I want to know what page they decided it was okay to do that. All of those types of things are incorporated into my next draft, so hopefully by the time it gets to the end reader and gets to my agent, those types of things are gone.
That's very cool. I got to think about that.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody? All right, Renee's going to grab a mic for you. Right here.
Thanks, dancing girl.
It's on.
Could you explain to me the process that you write with? Who writes what in the book? I'm interested to know when you write with Patterson, how do you determine what section of the book you write, or do you just write the book and then he writes a book and you combine? How does that work?
I'd say it's a very intensely collaborative process, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, again, we've signed NDAs that are this thick. What I can tell you is I've worked with a lot of different people. I work with Dacre Stoker writing the prequel to Dracula. I've worked with other New York Times bestsellers. The trick is it's almost like having two cooks in the kitchen. You don't both want to make eggs at the same time. You figure out what this person's strengths are and what this person's strengths are, and you focus on those, and you kind of divide up the work. And you check each other. One of the nice things about working with somebody like Jim is he's extremely sharp. He's very good at coming up with ideas. You may write the best scene possible. You may think you've got it all figured out. You send it to him. He'll come back to you 10 minutes later with a way to make it better. And sometimes it's vice versa. But by having a second person in the process, those things happen, and they wouldn't have before if I'd been writing the book on my own. So if you work with somebody else, I guess that's the moral of the story, is just try to figure out what each other's strengths are and build on those.
Yeah, he's very, very, very sharp. I mean, he'll come up with ideas that you had never thought about, places to take the story you've never thought about, and he's also quick to point out errors. Like, I once made the mistake of misnaming one of Alex Cross's sons, and he said, "Who the hell is so-and-so?" "It's so-and-so." And I was like, oh, God, I screwed up.
Any questions?
Okay, I'm going to give this one a try because I'm looking at you very experienced authors, and I'm thinking about, well, he also collaborated with Bill Clinton, right? And I'm just trying to envision him telling Bill Clinton that he's wrong and go fix it. And do you have any comments about that? How do you envision that one worked?
Well, I know when they did The President's Missing that actually he became very, very good friends with Bill. Jim has a place in upstate New York, which is near Chappaqua, and I know that he and his wife Susan often go out to dinner with Bill and Hillary. And I think it probably was a challenge at the beginning, but I think Clinton had the know-how to let the story master do his work, in that his role was helping in the writing, but also in providing, the incredible details of what it's like to be a president, or in their latest book, The President's Daughter, what's life like a former president, because it's two different things. But yeah, I can see him saying no to Bill Clinton. Dolly Parton, I doubt it, because she's very charming. He told me she once called him up and sang him happy birthday over the phone, and to have Dolly Parton sing you happy birthday over the phone, that must be pretty cool.
Again, I think it's similar to what I just said. I think he's very good at figuring out what the strengths are. So with somebody like Clinton, Clinton's writing style may not be up to the same stuff as Jim Patterson, but he can tell you where a piece of gum is stuck in the carpet in the Oval Office. He can tell you things that you could never figure out as an author, and that's what Jim honed in on, and they fleshed out in that book. And I'm sure he did the same thing with Dolly Parton.
All right, we do have another question.
Ken Follett, when he was speaking on Writers of the New England Stage here, said he has a basic outline of his stories, but then he knows every 3 or 4 pages he has to work in that something happens. Somebody comes, or a letter arrives, or something like that. Do you also work at that level of action? Every few pages something happens?
Well, I think I try to do this with my own work, but each chapter should end on a high note, not meaning, and then the house blew up, or then the car fell into the ravine. But each chapter has to end at a point that the reader says, "Oh, I know it's 11 o'clock, but one more chapter," and just keep on going. Each chapter has to end to propel the reader to dive into the next one, especially if you're doing a work with multiple characters. So you'll leave one chapter with one character in deep doo-doo, and then you pick up, and there's another character, and then they end up in deep doo-doo, and then the next chapter is, well, we'll go back to the previous. It's just, you've got to remember the reader is always first, that you've got to grab their attention, because they have so many other things that are competing for time, dinner, the dog, Netflix. You've got to be able to grab the reader's attention and don't let go.
I paint myself into corners all the time. And I do it on purpose. I'll come up with some crazy scenario, or it could be a very simple scene, a family having dinner or something like that. But I end up, I'll end that scene with somebody busting through the door and shooting somebody that you didn't expect. And like me as the author, I didn't expect it. So I paint myself into this crazy corner, and then I go on a 5-mile run every day to try and figure out how to get myself out of it. So it's this constant give and take. One of the things that I learned early on working as a book doctor, almost every single chapter, if you want to have it end on some type of cliffhanger, all you have to do is go back and look at whatever was written and delete either the last sentence or the last paragraph. Because a lot of times the author tends to go just a little too far, including myself. So if I'll go back and I'll read a chapter that I know is intense, but if I take out just the last sentence of it, it's going to make it that much more of like what Brendan just said, where you have to flip that next page to figure out what comes next. We tend to over-explain. Our brain wants us to finish out that chapter as a finished product. Everything has to equal and be done. But in order to get somebody to turn that page, it can't be done. You have to basically end it with a question that forces them to have to move on.
Yeah, the highest praise you get is when you read the Amazon reviews. I read Amazon reviews, do you?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Some writers stay away from them. But the greatest praise is someone will write, darn it, I stayed up till 4 a.m. to finish this novel. I couldn't put it down. And that's it. You can't get much better than that.
Yeah, I read all of them. One of my beta readers is actually the first person to give me a 1-star review on my first book. So I emailed her. Back then you could actually get an email address through Amazon, and I said, hey, if you take your review down, I'll let you read my next book and just give me your feedback on it. So I accomplished 2 things. I got rid of the review, and I found a beta reader that's been with me for almost 10 years now.
That's great.
Yeah, a lot of writers don't read the reviews, and I purposely focus in on the bad ones because I want that criticism. I want to know what's wrong with it. You need a thick skin in this business. But,
yes.
Most of the time they're, a lot of times they're right, not always. But if you see the same comment over and over again, there's probably something to it, and I try to work that out in the next book. So yeah, reviews are extremely important.
Agreed.
I've heard authors speak about their writing process and talk about starting with an interesting character and seeing what that character reveals of themselves to them, the writer, which is a lot of mystery, and it doesn't seem to... Does that work for you, also working with an outline?
It kind of does. So when I'm pantsing a book, I basically come up with my beginning, middle, and end, and those things may change. But I know my basic story. I create the backup book blurb, so those 250 words that you would see on the back of the paragraph. I create that because it basically gives me the movie trailer version of what my book is about. And I also create what's called a tagline, so a 1-sentence description of what that book is about. I do all that before I actually start the writing. Then I also create my characters, and I get to know them as well as I know like my best friend. Like my lead detective in my 4MK series, I could tell you if you dropped him at the entrance to Disney World, I know what ride he's going to go on first, I know what he's going to eat for lunch. None of those things will ever make it into a book, but he's real enough up here where I know those things, and I feel I need to be in that place, in that mindset, before I can actually sit down and write them as a character. Because now if I know people, and they are people to me, if I know them that well, I can take that scenario, drop them into it, and I know how they're going to react, and that's kind of how the story unfolds.
I did that once with a novel that came out a few years ago called The Negotiator. And one day a line just came to me, and it was the first line of the first chapter, and it was something like this: I'm a negotiator, the best in the world, and you've never heard of me. And it was about a guy who would negotiate between criminals. Let's say you're a criminal and you just stole a bunch of diamonds, but you don't know how to fence them. Where do you go? You contact the negotiator, and he sets up the exchange. What if you steal a very expensive car? What do you do with it? And the negotiator is the person who does that. And then I thought, well, what's his background? And in the book, I never tell you his real name, and his background is, I wrote something like, well, how did I get to have this skill? Well, I could have been a hedge fund dealer on Manhattan, or I could have been one of the best car salesmen in Southern California, or I could have been a special forces soldier negotiating between ancient tribes in Afghanistan. Pick one, and I just kept his whole inner life a mystery. And that was something very different, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that entire process is very weird. I've got a book that I'm wrapping up right now, and it's about a guy who's at the airport, and he's standing in line at TSA, and he looks over, and there's a couch there, and somebody had gotten up, and their cell phone fell out of their pocket. So he goes and picks up the cell phone, and when he looks at the screen, he realizes that the information on there is basically a hit. There's a picture of a girl. It's telling the person who owned that phone where she's going to be in the airport, and the person who owns that phone is supposed to go and kill her. He picks up that phone, and he walks over to TSA to show it to him, and the screen timed out, and it went black, and he can't get in because he doesn't have the lock code. That story actually became a lot more interesting when I made him a plumber. So little twists like that are what really propel a story forward.
I like that.
Any other questions? Oh, okay.
Nope, someone's got a hand up.
Oh, Jack.
I'm always interested in who people, politicians, writers, whatever, admire in their own field. And there's some column in some newspaper that I read where they interview authors. And the last question every time for these columns is, what 3 other writers, living or dead, would you like to invite for dinner? What 3 writers, living or dead, would you like to invite for dinner?
Yeah, that's the New York Times book review. They do an interview each week with somebody. So, you want to give it a shot?
If anybody's tasted my cooking, nobody wants to come to my house. I'm in a unique position there too, because I've been in this industry for a while, and I know a lot of the names that are on the charts right now. And I also have the podcast Writers Inc., where we interview pretty much all of them. Like I'm working on a screenplay right now, so we interviewed Gillian Flynn, who wrote the screenplay for Gone Girl, based on her own book. I wanted to know how she did that, so I brought her on the podcast and asked her. And we've had everybody you could possibly think of on there, so I'm kind of in that unique position. When I was starting off, though, I got really lucky. Like I've known Dean Koontz for a while, and I told him that I wanted to bounce back and forth between horror and thrillers, which is something my agent just cringed at. But like I love writing horror, but it doesn't sell as well as thrillers, and I need to pay the bills. So I wanted to do both. And he was the one who told me to go ahead and just alternate from the get-go. He said, first of all, bill yourself as a suspense author, not horror or a thriller author, but you'll find a common thread that fits both. So like the information you read about me at the beginning of this actually comes from my Wikipedia page, so that's where most reporters tend to go to find out who I am. So I basically create that narrative, but I alternate. I write a horror book, I write a thriller book, I write a horror book, I write a thriller book, and go back and forth. Jim brought up the exact same thing when I talked to him about it, because he wrote, his first book was called The Thomas Berriman Number, which how many people here own that? Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a copy of that one. But his second book was Along Came a Spider, which did really well. And then he wrote another serial killer thriller, another one, and another one, and another one. And then he wrote a book called When the Wind Blows, about a girl with wings. And if you read the reviews on that book, they're horrible, because his fans got conditioned to expect that serial killer thriller. So I'm purposely used that advice, from him to shape my own career, along with what Dean said. And I'm alternating back and forth and kind of grabbing readers from both genres, and they're all accepting of it as long as you started at the get-go.
To answer the question of which 3 writers, I know so many authors alive, so I probably choose 3 dead ones. I would probably choose Ernest Hemingway, just because, then Flannery O'Connor, because she was really batshit. Well, she was a fascinating writer. You want to read a great short story, read A Good Man Is Hard to Find. That just creeps you right out. And a third would be going back to my childhood. When I was growing up, I was into science fiction and fantasy. That's all I read. So it would be Robert Heinlein, who wrote so many great science fiction novels and short stories back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, if I had to do it, I'd probably Ray Bradbury for sure. Michael Crichton, that guy was gone way too soon.
Yeah.
And Hemingway, because he could mix the drinks.
Yeah. As long as we didn't have to fight him, he was pretty good in the clinch.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was great. We have books for sale back at the table, and I'm sure you're both happy to sign. Yeah, great. And then the next event is at 1 o'clock upstairs. There's schedules at the door if you are interested in what else is happening this afternoon. All right, thanks so much.